Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
It is a Monday. There is football news. There is Commanders news. That means we are going to talk to Michael Phillips. Michael, how was your weekend?
Not as good as yours, obviously, in Indianapolis, but I trust you held it down for us.
Yeah, well, Indianapolis, we were just talking about my weekend. Indianapolis was last week. I came back and ran what has been described to me since as a hell race this weekend. We did High Rocks, which is a lot of fun. I enjoyed it, but apparently people think I'm nuts for doing this thing. So it is what it is.
Yeah, I took my kid up to Massanutten Ski Resort. We did snow tubing and all that stuff. It was great because it was like 65 this weekend. But they make the snow, so the snow's still on the ground, so you can just do all that in your T-shirt.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. You go skiing and you don't even need long sleeves. I mean, what a dream. I mean, also kind of a nightmare, but that's a different story.
There are planet implications that I'd rather not think about there.
Sure.
That make the whole thing scarier than it definitely was while we were just having fun.
The graphic that goes around, like the meme that goes around basically year-round where it's like the seasons of weather in D.C., and it's like you're in fake spring. Do you know which one of those? Yeah, which one of those? Are we in fake spring one? How many fake springs are there before we can actually be like, oh, let's put away the heavy coat for the winter?
There is traditionally a frost at some point in late March or early April. We have not nipped this thing yet. We are in cherry blossom season, though, I think, or at least we're close. So it feels like cherry blossom season is on the chart somewhere, right?
Yeah, no, that's definitely there. And hopefully cherry blossom season actually aligns with like the Cherry Blossom Festival, because sometimes they're just doing their best. And sometimes they miss it a little bit. And you're like, well, full bloom is scheduled for 3 weeks from now when the trees will be barren because they will have all fallen off already.
Yeah, one of the rough things is they planted the cherry blossoms in the left field at Nats Park, and they're beautiful. But the only people who ever get to see it are the people who come to that, fake game they do before the season with college teams to prep the arena.
Well, what more could you want to go to Nats Park than cherry blossoms? So, that's why I would go to that game. All right, so NFL Combine is in the books. I was indeed there last week in Indianapolis. Had a great time. It's always a good time. May the Combine, as much as Indy is not like the most glamorous place, may it always stay there. You watch the workouts obviously this weekend. You hear all the rumors, the different people. Schefter's all of a sudden saying like, "Oh, Washington's considering everything with that number 2 pick." When you come out of this weekend and kind of pull your head up for air this morning, get off the slopes and start planning your radio show. What was the number 1 topic for you coming out of this?
Yeah, and poking around, it does sound like they have not made up their mind, right? I don't think that's bluster or, bluffing or trying to get whatever. I'm sure everybody in the building has a preference at this point or has a lean, but I do think it's accurate to say nobody in there, organizationally, they have not made up their mind on what they're going to do. I continue to think that the most logical thing to do or the easiest thing to do will be to turn in the card and take a quarterback at number 2. You got a lot of other moving parts. Would Kirk Cousins come here? Would Russell Wilson come here? Would you trade up to number 1? Would you trade back? I think the thing to remember is I take you back to economics class here, Craig, right? Like,
oh boy.
People value what they have more than what they don't have, right? That's why it's so hard to do deals around these top picks or around these big players, because the value they perceive on the number 2 pick, generally speaking, is higher than the value other teams perceive the number 2 pick to hold. And that's going to be true at number 1, too. Unless Chicago is just dead set, we are absolutely trading this pick, they're probably going to value it more highly than the Commanders are. So I do think inertia will start to take its toll as we move down this road. I think the other thing, and I'm sure we'll dive into it, is the Drake Maye versus Jayden Daniels dispute, option, whatever you want to call it. I don't think that shows any signs of relenting anytime soon. I think both those guys have real positives. I'm going to give you a super wishy-washy answer of I'm kind of not mad either way.
Yeah, no, I don't think I'm mad either way. I'm finding myself leaning more towards May as the process goes. We'll circle back to that in a second, though. I'll get your lean amidst your wish-wash. But I want to touch on the 2 vets that you mentioned. in part because we obviously get the news today, about an hour ago, that the Broncos have informed Russell Wilson he's going to be released.
Yeah.
They're going to take this $85 million in dead cap money. He is still going to get paid bukus of money from the Broncos. And J.I. Halsell was on with a salary cap expert who goes, look, if Russ wants to, he could very easily take a $1 million veteran minimum deal next year, still get paid out the wazoo from the Broncos, and help his team out to spend a bunch of money elsewhere in free agency. Is that a path that is remotely interesting to you for the Washington Commanders to go after Russell Wilson at that super cheap number, knowing you then have like 80 plus million other to spend in cap space and the number 2 pick and 5 top 106, et cetera, et cetera?
I am insanely interested in that road, Craig Hoffman. I am not backing down off this one. Every team should be wildly interested in getting Russell Wilson at that price. You would be crazy not to. Now, we can sort out the rest of it. Should Russell Wilson be interested in being here? What are the long-term implications of that? But honestly, even if you're turning in the card at 2, even if you're going to trade up to 1 and get Caleb Williams, it just makes a ton of sense to have a year of Russell Wilson as a bridge, as a chance for him to prove himself, whatever that is. One of my big things on my show has been, I don't want whoever it is they draft starting 17 games this year. I don't think that's a good idea, given the roster and the way it looks and the talent that's out there in free agency at left tackle and the possibility of starting a rookie from week 1. I think it's just an insanely intriguing possibility. I don't think Russ wants a team like this where he's going to have to do a lot of work. It's maybe a multi-year operation. I think he's a far better fit maybe in a place like Minnesota where it's a little more plug and play. But I mean, I don't know. I think everybody should be interested in Russ right now.
So I think it comes down to this when it comes to Russ. It's like, how much of a weirdo do you think it is? I'm sorry, that's indelicate, but like there are plenty of stories about Russell Wilson's unique personality, and there are some of them that are great. He is obviously takes his job very, very seriously. There's also some where that seriousness with which he takes his job has rubbed people the wrong way, to say the least. So I think to me, it depends on, especially if you're going to take a quarterback at 2, because I think the idea of Russ starting this year, setting an example for your young quarterback of what it means to be a professional is actually incredibly intriguing, unless that example is actually not the one that you want him to follow, which I think is in the cards in terms of the mixed reviews that Russell Wilson has throughout his career.
Yeah, the last 2 months have been really kind to Russell Wilson in that regard, right? He was the bad guy when he left Seattle, right? If you ask people, like, who's the bad guy? Is it Pete Carroll or Russell Wilson? Everybody would have pointed at Russ's picture. Who's the bad guy in this one? I think it's Sean Payton. I think Sean Payton's the bad guy in this one, and I think he's running Russell Wilson very early in a guaranteed contract. I think he's setting his team back in doing so. I think Sean Payton comes across as the bad guy here, which helps Russ on his redemption tour here. Now, you mentioned the quirks. Those are real, obviously. He's also crazy good at what he does, crazy dedicated, a leader. I don't think he wants to go anywhere where he's not the undisputed number 1 out of the gate. You always hear like, you should back up Rodgers, or, you know what, he should go compete with whoever. I don't think that's his care. Like, I think he operates best when he is the number 1 unquestioned leader in the building, right? And I think he'd get that opportunity in Washington, D.C., if you plugged him in there. So I do think D.C. could offer that. I think that is where you maximize Russ. Obviously, he had his clashes with Sean Payton this year. That wasn't good for anybody. But the other thing is on a short-term deal, you can take your chances. You can cut him if you need to cut him. That's not great for anybody. That ends poorly for everybody. But it's an option. It's on the board.
It is, and I tend to agree with you that this is probably not the place that Russ wants to go. I do think it's a little more intriguing on Cousins if it can be convinced by a guy like Adam Peters that, like, hey, dude, we'll build. What do you want? Like, we'll go get it. We'll go spend money on wide receivers. Plus, we have some. We'll go spend big money on O-line. We'll draft what you want. Do you have any interest in a Kirk Cousins return, which is going to come with a very different price tag? But Washington, of course, has the money.
Yeah, price tags don't matter. I'm pretty nervous about a Kirk Cousins return in terms of time frames, right? I think what Adam Peters communicated on Friday, releasing the guys that he released, was I'm working on a long time frame. Like, I'm working on a 3 to 5 year plan to build this roster and get it right. I don't think Kirk Cousins is working on a 3 to 5 year plan. And frankly, I've got my skepticisms that Kirk Cousins will be as good of a quarterback in 4 years as he was this past year before the injury. I think it's fair to have skepticism about what he'll have to offer this season coming back from the injury. So I'm a little nervous that the time frames, the incentives aren't aligned here, right? And good on Cousins. I'm not mad at all. Dude's got leverage, and he's going to use it, right? But he's going, that I'm not putting them in the same level, but it's known as the Tom Brady route now, the Aaron Rodgers route, right? Like, I will come to your team, but it's not just about giving me my money. It's also about, I want this guy and this guy. I want you pushing your chips in with me that we're going to make something happen here. I think Adam Peters would be incredibly reluctant to do that.
No, I agree. I think that's probably the right move for Washington. It's also why I worry about like the long-term repercussions of the leadership stuff with Russ. Even despite the price tag, I'm like, I kind of want the new leadership to emerge quickly and not Russ to be here and be the dominant force in the room for a year. But with Cousins specifically, yeah. And that's also why, like, if I'm him, I look at, like, what do you want? Justin Jefferson? Cool. Back to Minnesota. Because that's what I'd want if I was a quarterback, is to throw to Justin Jefferson. All right. As you mentioned.
I think Minnesota gets a deal done with Kirk. It makes too much sense to me. I do think Atlanta's a player here, but I think he ends up back in Minnesota.
Agreed on all fronts. You did mention is Michael Phillips, of course, MP on the mic, 910 The Fan in Richmond. Daily, you can listen to it on the free Odyssey app, or if you can't listen to it because you have a day job, then you can listen to the the MP on the Mic podcast with Michael, which is just the podcast of said radio show. Bada bing, bada bam. All right, but in terms of the quarterbacks that are more likely to be on this roster, Daniels, Maye, you mentioned you're kind of wishy-washy, kind of okay on them both, but coming out of the combine and everything you're hearing, do you have a lean one way or the other?
Yeah, well, you heard, right, Drake Maye dominated the room, was a leader, was all the things they wanted to hear in the interviews. And you heard kind of the opposite on Jayden Daniels. He was quiet, he was reserved, deferential, which doesn't mean one's going to be a good quarterback and one's going to be a bad quarterback. I continue to think that with Drake Maye, the floor is very high. I don't think Drake Maye is going to bomb out, that he'll be out of the league in a few years or anything like that. I think you get a very steady baseline of production. You can turn on the tape. You can see him make a lot of throws. You can be really impressed. I'm done ranting about people who call him Sam Howell 2.0. If he's Sam Howell 2.0, he's a fully different model. That's not it. That's not what this is here. I like him a lot. I continue to be intrigued by the ceiling on Jayden Daniels. I think he's got a higher ceiling. I think the off-schedule stuff, the way he makes plays, the way he delivers when the chips are down, there's something to that. There's always been something to that. That's something that's always going to intrigue me. I'm a sucker for a high ceiling, Craig. I love a good high ceiling guy. The floor is indisputably lower. But if you're going at 2, what are you there for if not to roll the dice and see what you can get out of it?
So let me flip this equation on its head for you, because this happened to me last week. We were having a conversation on the show as part of our first annual roundtable with Ben Solak, who brought up the topic of quarterback scrambles, and basically we're this long, winding conversation that is definitely worth everyone's time to listen to, because Ben drops immense amounts of knowledge, as he tends to do, is that we actually have our ceiling and floors backwards with quarterbacks. Because we think about running ability as raising the ceiling and throwing ability as putting a floor underneath you. I actually think it's flipped. I actually think if you are an elite runner like Jayden Daniels, your floor is higher, and how high your ceiling is dependent on how well you can throw the football from the pocket. Whereas a guy like Drake Maye, it's like, well, if he can't throw it, like, sure, he's mobile, he can run around a little bit, but like, he's not going to have longevity in the league. So I don't really have a question for you there, Michael. I just think that when we think about low floor, high ceiling, in some ways we get it backwards, because we think of like what highlights are possible, and Drake Maye's not going to have an 85-yard touchdown run, and Jayden Daniels might, and that's unique. But I think it's actually the other way. Like, I think Maye's ceiling is way higher, because he's actually a good athlete, a good runner, great mobility, and if he can dice you from the pocket, then that dude could be. I mean, some people think he's a potential Hall of Fame candidate. Like, they're great on him as that high.
Yeah, and all of that makes total sense to me. I'd probably throw injuries on the pile too. Jayden Daniels, man, when he gets hit, it looks like a Looney Tunes cartoon. He got arms and legs splattered all over the place, and somebody comes and pries him off the turf. That part scares me a lot on Jayden Daniels. How that will play at the NFL level and how that would play in this city with this team behind this offensive line. I don't think Drake Maye brings that concern to the table here, right? So I also don't think I have no concern with pairing Drake Maye and Sam Howell. I don't think that's an issue at all. I think they're being genuine when they talk about being friends and getting along, and how that wouldn't be an issue. So I have no issue with turning in the card for either player there. I think just not combine related, but just generally, I'd probably be upset if they turned in the card and it wasn't a quarterback. I think that would be a waste of being at number 2. I get how good Marvin Harrison Jr. is. He's so good, he didn't have to participate last week. I get that Joe Alt is an offensive lineman, and there used to be people here who wore pig's noses. That's great. I'm very happy for them. I just think if you're turning in the card at 2, it's either a quarterback or you're trading down. Otherwise, you're not getting the value out of that pick.
Yeah, so I think I agree with you on that part. It just seems like someone better take a quarterback at 2, and if it's not you, you better have gotten 3 first-rounders for it. If that's the case, okay, I'm not that upset about it. But you said something else earlier in that answer that I am starting to sour on a little bit, which is the idea of pairing Drake Maye and Sam Howell together. I would prefer to have, and maybe prefer is like softening this take here, I would very much like to have a veteran quarterback in the room because I don't really see the point of pairing those 2 guys together outside of Sam is a fine quality backup. But you can get other quality backups who have more experience in the league and who, by the way, if they happen to start the season for you and are good, don't create this complex problem of what do we do with this other 23-year-old quarterback who's good all of a sudden when we just spent the number 2 overall pick on Drake Maye. I would prefer to trade Sam Howell and get some value for him and then bring in a less threatening, if you will, veteran. Because even if Jacoby Brissett is really good for a full season, then next year you're just like, hey, Jacoby, thanks, dude. See ya. Where if, say, Sam Howell starts the year for you because you don't want Drake Maye playing yet, and he has a 4,000-yard, 30 touchdown, 10 pick season, and you all of a sudden make the playoffs, which I don't think is out of the realm of possibility. Is it the best possible outcome? Yes. Is it likely? No. But not out of the realm of possibility. Then what the hell do you do? And I don't know if people have, in the fan base and the media, have thought that fully through yet, where I'm wondering how much Adam Peters and company have thought that through.
I love that problem. That's a great problem. Sign me up for that problem. I would love to do 3 months of shows around that problem of you have 2 players who are too good. Well, oh my gosh, what a problem we've ended up here with. I personally would love to do that show. That sounds aspirational. I'm super pumped about even the vague possibility of that.
Michael, that's a great point. Shame on me.
When I say Sam Howell in DC, honestly, straight up, I see him as a 3. I think he's QB3. I think you've got a veteran. I think you've got a veteran at 2. Look, Sam Howell, people, you can get a 3rd rounder for him. What do you do with a 3rd rounder? You go try to find a young guy who might be Sam Howell someday. I see the value in keeping him, but to me, he's QB3. You know what he is. You can put him in there when you need to put him in there. But I'm bringing in a veteran as QB2. I think a 3 quarterback room is absolutely the way the NFL is trending. Last year, not counting Week 18, right, the garbage time week, more teams started a backup quarterback than didn't start a backup quarterback at some point during the season, right? You need that, and you need to go 3 deep because when the backup's in, you need somebody behind him. How's my QB3?
If that's the way you want to do it, I don't mind that. Drake's thing got a buddy if it's May. Drake's got a buddy in the room, been around, and you have that veteran that's the leader of the room. Okay. I just think Sam Howell's better than a quarterback 3. Sam Howell's a borderline starter. Low-end starter, super high-end backup. And if that dude's your QB3, I do wonder, would you be better off having your 3rd-round pick be a starting tight end for QB1 than keeping Sam Howell around either in case of emergency or to trade him for something like a 3rd-round pick a year later?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the 3rd-round pick is a high-potential pick for sure, and tight end was a great spot to mention. They're going to need one. Eugene Shen is very much on the record as declaring that a high-value position. I won't be surprised at all when they go for one. Offensive line remains a huge priority. You can generally get an offensive lineman in the 3rd round, not a guy who's ready to jump in and start week 1, but as we mentioned, they're working on a long-term time frame here. So, yeah, if you wanted to load up, if you wanted to, grab as many picks as you can, as many guys as you can, I'm also curious if maybe, this is a trade for a future year, right? But, when you move guys, if you move John Allen or if you move Sam Howell, you're moving them not even for picks this year, but for picks next year, knowing that you're going to have a whole year with your team and kind of your operation and you know how it goes. I don't think these guys are scared of kicking the can down the road.
No, and that opens up a world of possibilities, because if you can get either a current 4 or a future 3 and you're them, I take the future 3. And a lot of teams wouldn't.
Bill Belichick made a career out of that.
Yeah. And then he didn't have any of those players that he drafted in the last decade get to a second contract, and that's why his career's over now. But he had a good run, as they say.
I would take the Belichick. When we talk about good problems, I would take the Belichick style run with the problems that occur at the end of it. I would be all right if 18 years from now we're discussing the end of the era and how none of these draft picks from the last 5 years have panned out.
Yeah, co-sign on that. All right, last thing for Michael Phillips here, MP on the mic, 10 a.m. to noon on 910 The Fan in Richmond. Jason Kelce retiring is kind of the story of the day, and I was listening to a little Philly Sports Talk Radio on the way in, Michael, and you had people just calling WIP, our sister station in Philly, like in tears because of how much Jason Kelce has meant to them, the inspiration he provided, the leadership he had, the sense of community, all of those things. And I was thinking, is there an athlete that could retire in DC that could get this reaction where I'm doing this radio show in DC? So I've then opened that up to the audience in a 2-part question, which I will ask you now, and then we'll take more calls on it later in the show. Do you think there is a DC athlete that connected with the city and, let's say, the last 25 years in the way that Kelce did with Philly? And 2, is there a particular DC athlete for you that you're like, that's my guy when he retires or when he retired, that brought me to tears?
I love the question. I saw somebody posted online that Philadelphia, it's like the city that birthed democracy, and yet the starting center on the football team has 2 of the 5 greatest speeches in city history. He was so good today and so good after they won the Super Bowl. He's just so likable. You can't help but love the guy. That would have been Cooley if they had won a Super Bowl while Cooley was here. He would have absolutely been loved in that way and would have become that kind of person and character around town. They didn't. I think Ovi is your logical choice here, right? Ovi is loved, and that Caps parade is probably the high mark of DC sports moments in the last decade or since 2000. Just a great day and kind of that party that went on, and the great moment of seeing him lift the cup after so long. Hopefully he gets the record, and there's kind of a new surge of Ovi love at the end, which I think could put us there. 25 is a good marker to cut it off at because, there have been those athletes through and through. I mean, you look at it, it's not a whole city thing, but certainly Gary Williams, John Thompson. I mean, there are coaches who have had that kind of broad outsized impact who you could have done a whole show the day they retired. I think it speaks to where the teams are at right now. If Juan Soto had stayed, you can project a line where it might have been him long term. Obviously, even if he comes back now, that's a little bit not as much. I'll be curious to hear what you have to say because I do like the topic a lot. I don't know that we're exactly living in a golden age right now.
No, and there's so many factors that go into it, and team success is an enormous part of it, and unfortunately, none of the DC sports teams are qualifying at the moment. I do think the guy currently, if the Commanders turn this around and Terry is able to go out on a high note, like with a Super Bowl win high note, he could be that guy. But it's that's going to involve him staying in the next 7 years being unbelievable.
Honestly, I think John Allen's probably closer than Terry because
really?
Can you picture a Super Bowl parade where Terry does something just crazy memorable? I can't.
Yeah. I definitely can. I think Terry is a more dynamic personality than John. John is a guy, and they both have some of this where they just kind of want to go home after the workday is done and be with their loved ones, and they're pretty low key guys. But there's more. I don't know. I think there's more there with Terry on the ability to give that speech than John, who's just yeah, we lined up. John could give the OV speech, but that's the kind of short, sweet, to the point, memorable versus the emotional, introspective, journey capturing narrative that I think someone like Terry could deliver.
Yeah, I mean, look, honestly, the real answer is Robert, RG3. I mean, if he stays, if he wins, that dude was electric and so good at talking, which probably diminishes the role of talking.
Right.
But you see him on ESPN. He's really good at talking.
Yes.
And as professional talkers, game respects game.
That's clearly the highlight of Robert's career right there, is getting that compliment from you. Michael Phillips, MP on the mic. Hear him talk on the free Odyssey app, 10 a.m. to noon every single day. Just tune in to 910 The Fan in Richmond, or, of course, tune it in if you are driving down through Central Virginia. Michael, thank you, sir. Next Monday is the legal tampering period opening, so I do think we'll have news, a.k.a. I imagine we'll be talking this time next week.
I'll get my tamper-proof seal ready to go. We can bust it open at the appropriate time.
Excellent. See you then.